What makes live music sound live? This question comes from Carl in Chicago, Chi-Town. Hey Paul, what makes live music sound live and recorded music sound recorded? I understand that most people can fairly reliably tell the difference, and that's true. This has to be the question of the hi-fi era, along with a corollary of how to make the latter sound more like the former. I'm sure numerous scientific experiments have been conducted over the years in efforts to shed light on these questions. What have the key findings been? What are the most important psychoacoustic differences? Well, that is the question of the century, actually. And man, there are some really brilliant people working very hard on this problem, and because it's a multifarious problem. I mean, there's no simple answer. But let me give you a few thoughts and insights into my thinking on it. And I'll tell you, I think a lot about this. I've described this on this program. I've described it in Paul's post. I described it in my book, 99% True. We routinely can identify live from recorded in the most disparate of situations. For instance, I found myself before walking down the street, lost in thought, doing whatever, and I hear the sound of someone practicing their guitar or their drums inside of their house, and they've got the window open. I can tell immediately that it's live. Now, how is that possible? I don't have a great answer. Part of me thinks that it's because of the extraordinary dynamics that live instruments have that most stereo systems don't. And I think that has to be part of it. And I've kind of narrowed it down to dynamics in many cases. But it doesn't explain everything. I've been to airports where, I'm just, in an airport, you're lost thinking about whatever, or people watching, whatever you're doing, and you're just kind of yo-de-do-do-do walking along, and I'll hear out of the corner of my ear a musical presentation. I just did that, where was I? Maybe it was in Chicago. I think it was in I don't remember. Anywhere. I travel a lot. So I was somewhere, and I could clearly hear that there was live music being played, and this is in, a crowded airport space. So I had to go over and go around and look, and there they were. There were just a trio of musicians that were playing, and they were all amplified. But I could tell that it was definitely not just a recording. So yeah, there's plenty of validity to that. It's something I stress on all the time. And dynamics, I believe, are part of it. The other part that always fascinates me is, let's think about this as a thought problem. So let's say you have a 25-piece orchestra, and they're spread out. They've got their horns, their violins, whatever they've got, their drums, and you're now going to take a pair of microphones, or multiple microphones, whatever you have. You're going to take the amalgam of all of that sound, narrow it down onto 2 channels, and then release it back onto 2 channels. Kind of like in the same sort of sense where we take a high-resolution file and we compress it down into this little file, and then we kind of open it back up, right? I mean, it's not the same, but it's just sort of that taking this big thing down to something small and then re-expanding it back and hoping that it will be the same, but it's not. And it almost can't be. For one thing, you are reproducing the amalgam of all of these pieces. And when I'm standing in the middle of the 25-piece orchestra, there's a very different set of things happening. Yes, I too hear the amalgam of all of that happening, but and I do it with my ears, but my ears are very different in the way that they interpret sounds through my head and the perceptual hearing than just a set of microphones do. We're not the same. And what I can hear things going on over here and here that a microphone may or may not pick up the proper phase cues and all of that. And one of the thoughts that I've had for a long time is if you were able to replace each of those musicians with a speaker, so where you had a separate microphone on every single musician, and that microphone, you had 25 channels, and then you played it back through 25 speakers, all positioned in exactly the same place, I'll bet you'd get pretty close to live sound. And if you were standing there and you reproduced it, and you in the darkness, and you played that back relative to the amalgam through a pair of speakers, which your ear can pretty easily identify as two speakers, I think you'd be much better off. Of course, that's highly impractical. That's not going to happen. That's not what we're going to try and do. But it's just sort of a thought experiment. And I believe that in the meantime, because we can't really do that, and that's not going to be a very practical solution, we need better microphones. We need a different kind of microphone that can more closely pick up the perceptual cues that one might hear if they were actually listening. And bigger than all of that is the fact that we listen in an environment that is very different than the recording. And by that, I don't mean so much the room, because I think there are ways around that. I've devised a way to reproduce rooms, if we wanted to go that direction, to make an active room that would in itself reproduce the room that it was recorded in. But imagine you standing, again, in our orchestra or our band, you're not standing here like this with your head in a vice, are you? I mean, right now I'm moving around, I'm talking, I'm doing all this. We go around like this. Our head moves naturally. It just does. And every time my head moves, I get a different perspective of the live sound. Those microphones, they're stationary. So unless my head is stationary as well, which it isn't and never will be, it's going to be almost impossible to capture those live sounds and reproduce them without the ability of the sound changing as I move my head. So to do that, we'd have to have a very tricky, different system. And I know there are people working on stuff like that, that are specific to headphones, that'll measure your head movement and then change the filtering to adjust for that. But that's very tricky stuff. And that may be the interim answer where we go. So, long-winded, sorry. I'll talk to you tomorrow. Thanks for watching and for listening.